Born and raised in Providence, Rhode Island. In those days, very gentrified town now. In those days, just a poor mill town. My father was an electrician, grew up in a classic middle-class home. After graduating high school, I went to Providence College. I was planning to get my master's degree in business. And about 6 months before I graduated, the dean of students called me up and he said, "Bob, would you come up to the office?" And I went up and he said, "Would you like to be interviewed by the CIA for a job with them?" Ended up going down to Langley, took a whole host of interviews with CIA, and I had great visions of being James Bond. I can't sit behind a desk. So because I was in Washington, I decided I'd go out and interview with the FBI, Secret Service, and DEA predecessor at that time. And I'll never forget saying, I think I'd really like to go with DEA because those guys seem crazy. I was a street agent and a supervisor with DEA for about 17 years. I got a call from my deputy, Kevin Gallagher, about 11:30 at night. I was in bed, and I'll never forget his words. He said, "Bob, this is Kevin. Everett Hatcher has been shot dead." He was shot working undercover, assassinated from behind. Well, what happened, we found out later, was Gus Faraci became suspicious of Everett Hatcher. He simply walked up behind him, put 4 bullets in his head. That night, I did a press conference. Everybody who thinks doing a line of coke is a joke and doesn't hurt anybody ought to take a look at the body of this family man who has 4 kids and died trying to deal with those lines of coke that so many New York yuppies think is nothing. And apparently the president saw it, President Bush, and he was moved by it, and he called me and said he would like to come up to New York and visit with the widow of Everett Hatcher and the DEA agent.
Ladies and gentlemen, our Commander-in-Chief, the President, George Bush.
Finally, I had enough, and one morning I called my deputy at 6 o'clock in the morning and said, "Kevin, I'm going to go see John Gotti." And nobody else could know about it because it violated every rule in the book. He said, "You sure you want to do this?" I said, "Yeah, but if I don't come back, at least you know where I am." I went up to Howard Beach and I knocked on John Gotti's door. He came down, and it was amazing to me, 6:30 in the morning, his hair was combed and he was wearing a bathrobe that probably cost more money than my suit. And he said, "What can I do for you?" I said, "John, you know our guy was killed and you know Gus did it." He said, "Yes, and I'm sorry for that." I said, "John, I need him handed over to me or your business is stopped. Do you understand, John?" He said, "Yes, I understand. Thank you very much." And we each turned around and walked away. 17 days later, I got a call from one of our agents, and he said, "Bob, I think we got Gus Faraci." Gus Faraci was laying on the street corner in Brooklyn with 17 bullet holes in him. That was the end of Gus. Some of the New York papers said I was a hero. Some said, who was I to play judge and jury? But I was never going to allow a DEA agent to be assassinated and the person who did it get away with it.
I was born and grew up in a small town in Illinois, a university town called Champaign Urbana. At that time, I was being raised in the Lutheran faith and was going to Saturday school and Sunday school. And I got to talk to the pastor one day, and I asked him what was going to happen to all the Jews and the Buddhists and the people in Africa. And he told me they were all going to hell. And I went home and I told my parents I wouldn't go back to that church anymore, because in my heart, I could not believe what that guy was saying. After I kind of lost faith in Christianity, I was looking for something, and I was reading all these books by Jack Kerouac and Ken Kesey, and I think the most important book was probably Tom Wolfe's account of Ken Kesey and the Merry Pranksters. I ended up going to San Francisco, and LSD was unheard of in Champaign Urbana. So me and my friends, we became the first people in our high school to actually take LSD and smoke marijuana. created my own underground newspaper called the Tin Whistle, which just got bigger and bigger every month till it was being distributed in 4 high schools in my area, and it was banned in every single one of them. After I got hired by High Times, the first big story I did was to go to Amsterdam to interview the founder of the seed bank, a man named Neville, who had created a multi-million-dollar operation by shipping high-quality cannabis seeds around the world. While I was out there working on the story, I ran into some Americans who told me about the harvest festivals that had been held in Northern California in the early 70s. And it gave me the idea of trying to have a similar harvest festival in Amsterdam legally, where we could establish a worldwide standard for cannabis. I didn't know very much about marijuana when I came to High Times. It was only after I read Jack Herrera's book, The Emperor Wears No Clothes, that I got a sense of the tremendous political and spiritual implications that the plant carried with it.
Hemp can now make as an annual renewable farmable crop all the paper, fiber, most of the fiber, and 100% of the fuel for America.
And I think it was the knowledge of the environmental benefits of hemp that really helped drive me to my first national rainbow gathering.
In 1985, Robert M. Stutman was put in charge of the DEA's largest office in New York City. He put together a team of agents that led the fight against the crack epidemic. His best-selling book, Dead on Delivery, was made into a made-for-TV movie. He is a consultant to CBS News and has been called the most famous narc in America. In 1988, Stephen Hager was put in charge of High Times magazine, the leading counterculture publication in America. His book, Hip Hop, had just been published, the first history of rap, graffiti, and breaking. His research was turned into the film Beat Street. While at High Times, Hager created the Cannabis Cup and the Counterculture Hall of Fame. He has been called the most famous pothead in America. Now they meet in person. Hager versus Stutman. The head versus the Fed.